Good morning and welcome to Mountain Vista Unitarian Universalist Congregation on this bright and beautiful December day. I'm Debbie Roberts, one of the pastoral associates, and this congregation is served by the Reverend Dr. Samantha Wilson, our wonderful interim minister. We come to you live today from our beautiful new home. We are here today on the heels of a successful yard sale, which brought not only our own members and friends to this building, but members of the larger community as well. As reflected by the title of this service, we are becoming a home. And our services between now and the end of January will reflect this theme. Welcome from our home to yours.
Debbie and I light our chalice with these words from Reverend Scott Taylor in honor of first steps. We light this chalice in honor of first steps, for beginning even when the path ahead is unclear, for the courage it takes to trust that the way will reveal itself, that light will come to clarify our vision, and that friends will be by our side. May the words and songs and stillness and common breath of this hour remind us that every step of the way is never one we take alone. Welcome.
In the spring of 2016, this congregation made a momentous decision. We decided to leave our familiar Cromwell home and strike out into the wilderness of the desert, not knowing when or where we would find a new home. We have been wandering in that desert for almost 6 years now, and we are almost home. It is a testament to our members and friends and ministers that our beloved community has survived and even thrived during this time of uncertainty. This period has been rife with challenges we never could have anticipated. When our period of diaspora began, Reverend Ron Farris undertook this journey with us, but he answered to the call from the North in June of 2019. For our last service at Cromwell, Reverend Ron delivered a sermon entitled, Spirit Draw Near. And before he left on his own journey of discovery, he crafted a series of sermons with titles such as The Promised Land and The Beat Goes On. In these sermons, he not only accurately predicted what would happen as our diaspora continued, but he also encouraged us to have faith that we would find the promised land and become what we were destined to become. In a moment, you will be listening to excerpts from 3 of these sermons. As you listen, we invite you to remember, if you were there, or imagine, if you were not there, the feeling in this community. Did we believe this leader and give credence to the possibility he predicted? Could we have imagined what was coming? A pandemic, a lengthened interim, dreams dashed and then rekindled again. And finally, a beautiful repurposed building in a world that has changed beyond what we could imagine. What must Ron have been feeling as he kept promising that he believed it was possible, even as he was leaving? Come now, listen to the voice from a leader of our past and wonder how it speaks to us right now, right here, as we go back to the future.
powers and principalities of our world are reflected in this darkness of this time of year. Given that, how are we to be a light in this darkness? Immediately closer to home, right here in this very building, there is also uncertainty about our day-to-day and intermediate future as a congregation. Where will we be? How will we do this? Where am I supposed to do that and when? The status quo here is in upheaval, and there are little traps of inconvenience all around. Whose responsibility is this? Who can I blame?
You been reading my emails?
No. I am. But that's the darkness talking, right? That's the fear talking. We cannot afford, neither as a congregation nor as a people within this republic, to cede our power to fear, to let our light go out, to give in to darkness. We cannot afford to do that. To be in service to this congregation in many ways as we are in transition, even if that service is just bringing the gift of generous flexibility.
The Promised Land, a topic most resonant with our current circumstances at MVUU. I bring you good news. No, I'm not going to announce a mortgage, not today, but have faith. There is a promised land. It is awaiting our arrival. It's just there. Not far at all. So have faith. You are sitting in a story right now. In time, it will become a kind of fairy tale, a legend within the Mountain Vista community. Have faith. There will be a resolution. And at that time, after the resolution, you will be able to look back on our story and ponder, what was my role? Who might each of us have been in the story of our journey to the Promised Land? The shepherd, the trickster. Our Promised Land is not a new home. That will be a symptom of our faith. Our Promised Land is the beloved community that holds the world and all beings in it in love and joy. And from this perspective, we might speculate that maybe the building is waiting on us to be the community that deserves it. Which means that maybe it is waiting on us to believe we deserve it. Because that means living into our covenant and our principles, and beyond that, to the connection that they point to, as though they were the skin through which we feel the world. Once upon a time, there was a people confined, unable to become what they were meant to become. With no little effort, they managed to extricate themselves from their confinement. They did not know where they were going, but they shared a common perspective, a common language for rendering the world. And through that, and as part of that, and in fact, all importantly, Within that, they had faith. They knew a promised land awaited them. The Israelites were led by a stuttering maniac named Moses. He claimed to speak to God. And into the wilderness they went and wandered and searched. And are we there yet? 1 year bled into the next. Are we there yet? And the next. Okay, so maybe this wasn't the best or most inspiring example. But the point is, as I told you last time we spoke, the promised land is real, is now, was then, is faith, was faith, and will be. And it's a bit of a cliche, really. Spiritual leader of a group seeking the promised land fails to reach the promised land with the people they once led. It's a trope. The leader expires, retires, is killed, or otherwise vanishes, leaving the people to make the last passage, if they can manage to stay a people. If there's one thing that I would leave you with, it is a reminder, and I'm not leaving for a couple months yet. But if there's one thing that I want you to remember, it is to remember to see the love that is in this room and in this community. And while I am and have been blessed to be a part of it, I am quite obviously not it. It's way bigger than me, and it's bigger than any of us. It's the spirit of this congregation, of our collective. And it seems silly to say it, for it appears obvious to me, but I think this might be a good opportunity to recall that the minister is not the congregation. Never has been. My story here is drawing to a close that feels to me natural and organic. And if you'll permit me some grandiosity, it feels a little ordained. It's time for me to go. I wish I could have stayed to see the promised land that you will see. There is a tomorrow, and so you will have an interim for a little bit. The board and regional staff are already taking initial steps to that end. You will get some new blood with some fresh perspective, and you will find a home. And then you will call a minister who is smarter, funnier, more compassionate, more comprehensible in the pulpit, and better looking than me. And you will have grown, and you will thrive. Have faith. Not only is there a tomorrow, there is a promised land. It will be sustained and delivered by your covenants, by your love, by the heartbeat of that covenant. Be there for each other as you have been, but even more, even better. Be bound to connection and liberation. Realize the promised land. Have faith in the rhythm of the beat of this people. Love and be loved. The beat goes on.
In 1933, a folklorist and evangelical pastor heard a young girl sing a particularly striking folk song in a backwoods church in Appalachia. He was so taken by the melody that he expanded on it and wrote it down as I wonder as I wander. This was in the depths of the Depression and in a place where hope was in short supply. Nobody knew how long it would last, this new kind of wandering in the desert. Maybe this would just be the new normal, shanty towns and bread lines and no work. The Hebrew ancestors wondered as they wandered too. On the one hand, they were told that they were promised not just a homeland, but a land of milk and honey. All they had to do was find it. The old joke is that they wouldn't have wandered for 40 years in the desert if a woman had been in charge, because she would have asked for directions. But the truth is, there are times when there are no directions, and we don't have a choice. We are not wandering leisurely on vacation looking for the best tacos or margaritas. Sometimes we're forced to leave what has been familiar, whether we like it or not. According to the ancient tales, the Hebrews eventually found their land, and with the help of their particular God who loved them best, beat the crap out of the indigenous people and claimed it for their own. They settled down and they settled in, and one of their great kings built a magnificent temple for their God who loved them best to live in. And their entire religious culture centered in that temple. And they knew who they were and what life was all about until the Babylonians invaded. And then it turned out that the God who loved them best was not much help. The whole top 1% of Israel were dragged off in chains to Babylon, and there they had to decide something very important. If their God lived specifically in their temple in Jerusalem, which they would never see again, could they still be Jews? Could they maintain a community? And that's when they decided that their God wasn't just their God who lived in their land. That's when they decided that they would start the journey towards a universal monotheism. God didn't hang out in their temple after all. God wasn't in that familiar building. And they didn't have to make a new building in Babylon to install their God there either. Judaism started this long journey towards a universalist set of ethics and way of life that they could practice wherever they happened to be. That was the first Jewish diaspora. And there was a second, when the Romans came and demolished the temple entirely and destroyed the ancient state of Israel and sent Jews wandering all over the known world. Later, with the growing dominance of Christianity, came a growing appetite for expelling Jews. And the Jewish people wandered because they had to, because they were forced to. But everywhere they wandered, they kept their community. During the pandemic, we've all been wandering, and I wandered all the way out of Christianity. After 42 years in the United Church of Christ, after having been ordained, I wandered through the wilderness of DNA databases and discovered that I'm Jewish. That is a lot to wonder about. So I wandered around in cyberspace looking for a new religious community, and that's where I found you, on the dreaded Zoom. I hate Zoom, personally. I hate it like the plague. And yet, this is where I found the open door, in a church that has been in building interruptus for a couple of years. But the church isn't a building, as you all know, it's what goes on in a community. And if my ancient ancestors had only wandered the one time and stayed in their original promised land, they would never have found the truth out for themselves. So like me, many Unitarians have wandered out of other religions in search of the ideal land of milk and honey, the perfect community. Somewhere along the line, we figured it out that the best we could do was be in community with other people, which means sometimes there's a fight over whether or not the milk should be soy milk or oat milk. And let's make sure that honey is locally sourced. Now, the temple can be a rented room in a school or a lovely sanctuary in this beautiful building, but mostly the temple is in our hearts. And as the Zen teachers would put it, no matter where you go, there you are. It's okay to wonder exactly when, or even if, we will stop wandering in the land of Zoom. I hope to see you all soon, face to face, even if it's mask to mask. Maybe the next few years aren't going to be going back to the old ways. Maybe we can figure out a way to live in this new circumstance that none of us asked for, that we wonder about every day. When will we go back to Jerusalem? Maybe we can be even better once we know we can't wander backwards, only forward together into the new.
Today is the Kickoff Sunday for our congregation for fundraising for the UU Service Committee. It will go through December and January, a longer time than usual. My earliest memories of the UU Service Committee's work around the globe go back 40 years to when I first took my 3 children to Foothills UU in Fort Collins, Colorado, right around Christmas. We received a small cardboard box to assemble and put on our table to fill with coins and dollars at every meal. Now contributions have gone digital. This year, UUSC will celebrate its 80th anniversary of grassroots support for 50 partners across the world, bringing aid to communities affected by climate change, gender-based violence, natural disasters, and even youth leadership training. By answering these calls, our local guests, whom you'll meet in a video soon, amplify voices to world leaders for justice to underserved peoples. Please renew or begin your membership during December and January by reading the December 10th MVUU newsletter article for ways to donate. Or I think I've left some stories of hope, red brochures somewhere in the front part of the church lobby. In the words of UUSC's president and CEO, Reverend Mary Catherine Moore, quote, "We are a leading voice for human rights and social justice in the US and in the world, and this season provides our most significant source of funding. Plan now to join the UU community of 40,000 supporters who share your principles and passion for justice. Thank you, and please be generous, and a happy holiday to everyone."
In today's story, I want to introduce you to 4 people who live in different parts of the world, but are all working with UUSC to help their communities have more justice and more resilience. Justice is another word for making things fair, and resilience means having the ability to heal after bad or hard things happen. Even though we don't have a chance to meet them in person, I want you to imagine they're coming over for dinner with you and your family. Think of them as a dinner guest, telling you an interesting story over a big plate of your favorite food. All over the country, other kids like you are imagining the same dinner party and learning about the same people as part of a program called Guest at Your Table. The program is a chance to learn about 4 courageous people making a difference in their communities. This year, the 4 people we're going to meet are Axel, Myra, Maina, and Christian. First, I want to introduce you to Axel, who lives in Missouri. Axel works with the people who work in the food processing factories in the Midwestern United States. Many of the food service workers Axel works with are immigrants and refugees. Without them, we wouldn't have a lot of the food we find in our grocery stores. They feed our whole country. But even though they have this very important job, food service workers are often treated badly by the people that own the factories. They don't make much money, they are forced to work for a long time without breaks, and they had to work all through the COVID pandemic without many of the simple items that would have helped them be safer from the virus. To fight back against these unfair conditions, Axel is helping to organize people who work in these food processing factories so they can work together to get better working conditions for themselves and their communities. Next, I want to tell you about Myra, an activist who lives in the United States now, but she's originally from a country called Burma. Burma is also sometimes called Myanmar. When Myra was a little girl, her village was attacked by the country's military, and she was forced to flee her house along with her family. They weren't able to bring anything with them when they ran, and they all had to travel through the forest for many days before they reached the country next door. Eventually, Myra was able to move to the United States. Now that she is safe, Myra speaks out on behalf of the many people still in Burma who are facing the same military violence that Myra went through as a little girl. What Myra and her family went through was very scary, and making sure this kind of violence stops is very important to her. Myra is using her voice to call attention to what is happening to the people of Burma now. The third person I want to introduce you to is Maina Talia. Maina lives in Kiowa Island, which is part of the nation of Fiji in the South Pacific. Many countries in this part of the world are facing the impacts of climate change now. They are losing land to the ocean as sea levels rise. Kiowa Island has a higher elevation than many of its neighbors. This means that Kiowa Island will be a safer place to live as sea levels continue to rise. In order to prepare for welcoming new people to Kiowa Island, Maina and the members of the Kiowa Island Community Organization are working together to create community resilience by making plans and planting trees that will help the island withstand the forces of climate change. Lastly, I want to introduce you to Christian, who's from Nicaragua. In Nicaragua, many farmers have a hard time making a living because giant agricultural companies own the land, the farming equipment, and even the seeds. Christian and the other women in their farming cooperative are doing things a little bit differently. They care for their own land. They use traditional farming practices that do not harm the soil, and they plant a variety of different kinds of seeds that have been used by their communities for generations. This way of farming helps the land heal and helps women gain financial and social independence. Christian is helping her community build resilience from both climate change and violence against women with their feminist farming cooperative. I hope these stories were a chance to learn about the challenges this year's 4 guests are facing and how they are fighting for what is fair and for what is right, while also helping their communities become more resilient. Through Guest at Your Table, your congregation and other congregations around the country are helping provide the guests with the resources to do their work. Together, we can make a better and fairer world. Thank you.
I saw 3 ships come sailing in on Christmas Day, on Christmas Day. I saw 3 ships come sailing in on Christmas Day in the morning. And what was in those ships all 3 on Christmas Day, on Christmas Day? And what was in those ships all 3 on Christmas Day in the morning? Our Savior Christ and His Lady on Christmas Day, on Christmas Day. Our Savior Christ and His Lady on Christmas Day in the morning. Pray with us and those ships all 3 on Christmas Day, on Christmas Day. Pray with us and those ships all 3 on Christmas Day in the morning. Oh, they sailed into Bethlehem on Christmas Day, on Christmas Day. Oh, they sailed into Bethlehem on Christmas Day in the morning. And all the bells on earth shall ring on Christmas Day, on Christmas Day. And all the bells on earth shall ring on Christmas Day in the morning. And all the angels in heaven shall sing on Christmas Day, on Christmas Day. And all the angels in heaven shall sing on Christmas Day in the morning. And all the souls on earth shall sing on Christmas Day, on Christmas Day. And all the souls on earth shall sing on Christmas Day in the morning.
So I have a dangerous thing to admit. Actually, Monica, I did wish for this. I did wish for this. And I told myself I wouldn't tell any of you about this until I was right about to leave. But 6 months, I think, is enough, as long as you promise not to fire me. Okay, there's enough consensus in the room. I secretly wish, when I found out that you were all looking for a building before I came to be with you, I had this secret fantasy that you wouldn't find one, and that we would redistribute all the money that you raised into all of these radical organizations, and we would be a people who would rent perpetually, using our rental money to help fuel other organizations who needed the rental income while building organizational partnerships the entire way. And that's how you get fired from an interim. That's how you get fired in 3 days. Luckily, in 3 days, within 3 days of me joining you, that's not what happened. I received an email from your PMT leader, Jane Paul, first introducing herself in one email, and then the second email telling us that they found a building. So my fantasy was short-lived, but it's not because I hate building institutions. I am a millennial born at the time of the decline of church. Churches have always been in decline as I've been alive. Since the 1980s and 1990s and into 2000, what was once steady belonging in organized spiritual and religious communities shifted downward from 73% to what it is now, the first time ever, 47%. So the idea that I should question the building of religious institutions is not too far-fetched, but it's not that I'm hungry to get rid of what I know can sustain us. What I'm hungry to get rid of is its survival for its survival's sake. What I'm hungry for it to be is an institution that actually stays alive because it's effective at transforming lives. So I'm hungry that we are in transformation together, and that the very spark of the institution itself would hold, not because we will it against all will, but because even organizations and institutions have their own lifespan. They are born in a context, they live, and they die. And if more organizations were willing to die, and willing to die well, it would free up the people and the resources so that new ones could be born in the big bang of creation. Organizations that are actually responding to what's happening right now to the people who want to be there, who need the help. So the question is, though, for me, that you are not in decline. I couldn't will you into decline if I wanted to. You would fight very, very hard. But the other thing is this. One thing that we preached about 2 years ago, when you first approved to buy this building, was that you and I are the same age. You were founded the year I was born. Now, if I told you that I am struggling with some financial debts, and that I sometimes lack financial clarity, and that sometimes I draw on resources that I don't quite have but come from somewhere, and if I looked at you and said, "Am I in decline?" you would laugh in my face. You would say to me that you are a 34-year-old who is exactly where you should be. You, in the most grandparental way, would pat me on the back, not calling my digging and my striving foolish, but you'd call it an investment. And you'd say, "We believe in you." And so I return the favor. I want to tell you, you are not in decline even if you spent all the money. You are right where you need to be. You and I have faith in you. So here, not in decline, but still a people who identify as wanderers. When I looked at you online, scoping you out like a ministry dating profile, I saw even then you liked long walks in the desert. You called yourselves people who were wandering in the desert. And I saw that too when I would sneakily watch those very sermons from Ron, when I was looking at you, just like your future minister will watch this sermon to get a sense of who you are. And I learned right then and there that this feeling of being wanderers, seekers, was important to you. Now, I'll tell you, tucked into those pages, hundreds of pages that your ministry search team has been working on, that line still exists. That you are a people who are wandering in the desert. And so I am curious, when will you know you've arrived? I mean that seriously. When will you know you've arrived? The way that that story of the Israelites ends in the Jewish tradition tells us a little bit of something about arrival. The Rabbi Josh Franklin writes about the actual Hebrew literal translation of those last phrases in the Torah in Hebrew, and that story, that text, ends in something that would look like an ellipsis. Dot, dot, dot. And the Torah was written without punctuation, leaving a lot open to interpretation. And the final sentences are no exception. When they translate them, it's incomplete. Those of you who love good grammar would see quickly, it is not a forced end to a sentence, not a happy ending, and not a tragedy either. It is dot, dot, dot. So my friend, Reverend Tara Landers, a UU and Jewish colleague, talked to me about this. And she talked about the holiday of Simchat Torah, the holiday where the Jews unroll the scrolls, read that final sentence, dot, 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 where Moses ascends a mountain, sees the promised land, but does not enter it, and dies. And you are left wondering, dot, dot, dot. But then Genesis is read. So the way that it ends is that it goes right back to the beginning, all in one night, from ellipsis to exclamation mark. So the promised land is never a place you will ever walk into. Ron left that out. You see it there at the mountaintop, you breathe, and then dot, 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 Genesis. You begin again. Or perhaps the promised land, Reverend Tara said to me, was actually never over there. It was the mountaintop. It was the place that you journeyed to together, the clarity that you shared with one another, the transformation you underwent, and then the collective breath you take before that part of your journey dies. And then the choice to jump right back into creation again with one another, all like that, just one big breath. And then Genesis, which is really just God's breath, hovering over the face of the deep. So the Torah ends with a breath and a death, and it begins with breath over depth. That's how you know you've arrived. So I don't think your all's arrival has everything to do with the building per se, although it's tied. And that's not just because I'm an institution-resistant millennial. I have felt more proud and more hopeful of Unitarian Universalism in the last 2 years than I have had in a long time. And it is because the institution was willing to transform to take care of real people at a real time. 4 congregations, 2 of whom might have had beef with one another, did Sunday services together for 2 years. We were willing to collaborate in a way that was beyond our consideration. If I had told you when I showed up here that I thought we should do Sunday service with the other 3 congregations, would you have even believed me? Would you think we would have survived, let alone grown? If you could have imagined a fellowship hour where you didn't get to choose your seats, and yet at the end of it, you said you built deeper friendships than you ever had in years of being in the same place together. This was a transformative 2 years, and I am proud of all the wondering we have done together. But I think that is where we are, seated on a mountaintop, looking down at, I know, the building all of you long to be in. But there we are at the mountaintop together, aren't we? Breathing, looking, perhaps crying, perhaps joyful. If there is one thing I imagined, it might be that the promised land is not this building. The promised land is a people who can see the building and imagine themselves transformed before it. And in fact, I like it better. I like a promise-making land than a promised land. The land where we practice making promises and breaking promises and tending promises, promises that are real and relevant and fresh and of the now and of the needs that we share with one another, and about a people who are choosing each other now, not the thing we think is ours or we think will fix us, but the thing we are creating together. And so my humble request with my 6 months remaining is that that sweet gap between us seated on a mountaintop and us right in the midst of the creation is sacred time. That walk we journey together, because we will journey through it together, that walk is not to be rushed. One does not rush the promised land. But between there and there are seedlings. Things are growing. It is tender. And we are called to walk slowly and with presence together. We cannot wrestle our way out of COVID or wrestle our way to a new beginning. We have to let go of feeling like we were successful, but instead move curious, wondrous, listening, breathing. And instead of the clearest of endings or the clearest of arrivals, there will be a breath. And then, dot, dot, dot.
Makes it all real. direction. And just maybe I can convince time to slow up, giving me enough time in life to grow up. Time be my friend. Let me start again. Suddenly my world's gone and changed its face, but I still know where I'm going. I have had my mind spun around in place, and yet I've watched it growing. If you're listening, God, please don't make it hard to know if we should believe the things that we see. Tell us, should we run away? Should we try and stay? Or would it be better just to let things be? Living here in this brand new world might be a fantasy, but it taught me to love, so it's real to me. And I've learned that we must look inside our hearts to find a world full of love like yours and mine. Like
Before we close our service, we want to give a formal invitation to 2 moments where we start to tiptoe across the gap between the mountaintop and Genesis. One of them is December 24th, a service here at the building, a contemplative service called We Are Home, hosted by a number of your leaders here. There's 2 opportunities, 4:30 p.m. and 6 p.m. We'll gather outside on the patio. The first group will have about 40 people, and the second group will have about 50. And then in small groups of 8 or less, you'll be guided in a course through the building, exploring the possibilities and future imaginings of what happens if we bring what we learned while wandering into a new space, and we resist decorating the walls with our old ways of doing things. It'll be an invitation for you to imagine a future here in this community. We hope you can attend. The second date we want you to save, where we start tiptoeing into Genesis and into the big bang of a new creation, is January 30th. January 30th is going to be Mountain Vista's Building Dedication Day. It's going to be a big celebration that we do with the Baja 4, and it'll include both webcast and virtual elements and some kind of element outside the building that we will design so that anyone at any risk level can participate in blessing and dedicating our building. So please mark your calendar, January 30th, as we step into and step towards the creation ahead of us. And with that, our chalice extinguishing.
These words were written by Victoria E. Safford and are adapted from Desert Spring. They had no idea where they were going when they left that night, in the dark, without lights, without shoes, without bread, their children smothered against them so they would make no noise. They had no idea what they were getting into, following this Moses, this wild-eyed one who claimed visions and made promises, but who could, after all, guarantee them nothing, except death if they were caught. In the springtime, we remember the promised land is not a destination. It is a way of going. The land beyond the Jordan, that country of freedom and dignity and laughter. You carry it inside you all the while. It is planted in your mind and heart already, before you ever start out, before it even occurs to you that in order to leave that life in Egypt, the intolerable bondage of that life, what you need to do is stand and walk forward. Come, let's move tenderly and with wonder together across the gap and into creation.